This video goes over the price point staging flowchart. So these are items that were brought for price point clearance back from the inventory flowchart. So as a refresher, this piece of clothing has been pulled from the rack to make room for new stuff, and the item is not good, so it's not good style or condition, or it's been on the floor for 90 days, but it is in demand. Customers are currently shopping for this piece of clothing this time of year. So if it is not in demand, then it shouldn't be here, like we just mentioned. So these are only items that are in demand. And price point staging, this is basically, it's a quicker way to clearance items to get rid of them without having to go through all the heavy lifting of waiting for one of our clearance cycles. If we go through a normal clearance cycle, we have to store stuff in bins, they take up space, then we have to pull the bins, and it just takes a lot of labor. The whole point of this is to clearance things quickly, get them out of the store so we can keep our inventory fresh. So this is in demand. Then it goes into our price point staging. And in our price point staging, there are 3 sections of clothing. There's section 1, which is the current stuff. So this is what is currently on our price point rack. Our price point rack is a sale rack that is typically just a rounder or 2 Z racks, or it could be something else as we evolve. There typically is only one type of category of clothing out on the price point rack. So for example, it could be women's shorts, it could be women's hoodies, it could be men's tanks, but it's not going to be a variety for the most part. So whatever is currently on the price point rack, so if it's currently women's shorts that are on the price point rack, section 1 would be women's shorts. Section 2 is what's next on deck. So this is once we sell through everything in section 1, what is the next thing that's going to go on the price point rack? So if section 1 is women's shorts, potentially section 2 could be women's tanks. Section 3 is the backlog. This is everything else. So this is going to have several different categories of stuff in here. So this could be women's hoodies, men's tanks, men's short sleeves, men's long sleeves. There could be a bunch of different stuff in here. So whenever we bring something into price point staging, so we pull it from the rack and it is in demand, does it match section 1? So for example, is it a women's shorts? And if not, does it match section 2? If it does, we put it in section 2. But if not, if it does not match section 1 or section 2, then it goes into section 3, which is the backlog. And then it just waits here. This is our price point rack. So as we sell things from our price point rack, it needs to be replenished. That replenishment comes from section 1. So we have women's shorts on the price point rack. Customers buy 20 of them, and then we need to replenish. So we need 20 more shorts. We grab them from section 1. We put them on the price point rack. We keep doing this over and over and over. Eventually, section 1 is going to be empty. We're going to run out of women's shorts. So then what we do is whatever's in section 2, which could be women's tanks, that gets moved to section 1. So now women's tanks are here. Now as things sell from the price point rack, we start to replace them with women's tanks. This will temporarily make it so the price point rack has more than one category, but eventually we'll sell through all the women's shorts and it'll just be women's tanks. So once we do that, and so in this example, once we moved women's tanks from section 2 to section 1, that means that section 2 is empty. So here, when section 2 is empty, we need to take something out of our backlog, or section 3, and bring it into section 2. The way to determine what to take out of section 3 is we want to look for what is the biggest in-demand category that's currently in the backlog. So for example, if I have 200 women's short sleeve shirts in here, 100 women's hoodies, but 500 men's short sleeve shirts in here, then men's short sleeve shirts would be considered in the biggest in-demand category because we have the most of it. So basically, what do we have the most of in the backlog? That is in demand, is an easier way of asking that. Once you determine that, so in this case it would be men's short sleeves, you would take those and put them into section 2. So in this scenario, we'd have women's tanks in section 1, men's short sleeves in section 2, and then everything else in the backlog. So things would continue to move through this process. So things get pulled in here, they get tossed in the backlog. Eventually, once we sell through everything in section 1, section 2 moves to section 1, we take a category from section 3, move to section 2, and the cycle keeps repeating over and over and over. Once something is put on the price point rack, things here should sell very quickly. So if an entire category of stuff is not selling very quickly, then it probably means either the signage is bad, the placement of the rack is bad, or our price point is too high. So if an entire category is not moving, those 3 things should be fixed, and eventually it'll sell. As an extreme example, if we said everything was free, it would fly off. So we can always keep lowering the price point. The goal is to have the price point be as high as possible, but we want this stuff to move. We don't want to hang on for this longer than we need to. So ideally, everything will just sell. However, it's possible there could be a specific piece of clothing that is just so bad that nobody wants it for any amount of money. So if 2 weeks pass without selling, then it's going to go into a backstock bin for clearance. So the longest that any piece of clothing will be in the price point rack is 2 weeks. And that's it for the price point staging process.